zoom in on Bristol because we've had a rather horrific decision, and it seems a very quick one as well, rather than this taking a long time. Of course, when the council changes big things in the city, almost anything it does which affects the people of the city, they have to launch consultations. Well, this one has been, it seems, either incredibly short or entirely ignored by, almost entirely ignored by the City Council, and particularly by the Mayor, Marvin Rees, who's still in charge until this time next year. One of the things he seems to be doing before he goes, because we as Bristolians voted to get rid of the position of Mayor, to bring back the old system with our 70 councillors forming all these committees to run things and having to talk to everybody else about what they're doing rather than just do it. And being, chatted to by people like the merchant venturers and other powerful people in the city. This is one of the things I've found over the years. As power gets centralised, the rich and powerful love that, because they've only got one person to go and talk to get them to do what they want, rather than lots and lots of them to compromise. So here's the Mayor at Cabinet here in Bristol. On Tuesday this week, I think it was around about 4, 5 o'clock, 6 o'clock, something like that, in the evening, at Cabinet, talking about this decision to do with the boats.
So on to agenda item 21, which is what I think lots of people are here for, Bristol City Docks Fees and Charges Review. I'm going to introduce this report. So it's been 20 years since the last Fees and Charges Review, and a lot has changed in that time. So a review of our fees is overdue. The City and Harbour both have changed together over those 20 years. The population of the city has continued to grow, 395,000 people in 2000 to 472,000 today. And the use of the harbour has changed, where there used to be a lot more businesses around there, business-based and warehousing, but now it's much more about individual boats. But what hasn't changed is that this hasn't been as open and inclusive a part of the city as we would want it to be for the whole city. And while the harbour is synonymous with the city's identity, it's not equally accessible to all Bristolians. So we all want a fantastic harbour for all people from across the city and beyond to be able to visit, to live and to working. And we do have a good harbour, but it's not at the level that we want or need it to be. But if we want the harbour to be all it should be, it means we have to invest in the harbour and what's around it. So fees have actually fallen in real terms, and the harbour makes a loss. We need the harbour to become self-sustaining, which means raising the investment to fix the crumbling infrastructure and modernise the facilities. The importance of the harbour paying its way is even more so given the financial pressures on the council, which means, among other things, that we're looking to reduce the cost of adults and children's social care services. There's a pressure on parks, libraries that we've been holding off, and all the other pressures we've worked through today in our budget, from domestic violence to new children's homes and our emergency support schemes as well. So it's essential for the city and for the harbour that it becomes self-sufficient. The fees recommended are in line with benchmarking exercises we've run and bring us back in line with comparable harbours and facilities to make this a commercial rate. These fees aren't introduced until April, and in the meantime we will undergo a series of engagement opportunities with user groups to notify them of the proposed changes, and this will allow us to provide clarification and also give users an opportunity to raise any specific issues. So on this report we've received 1 public forum petition and 79 public forum statements and 50 questions. So the petition is from George Colby. So George, you have 1 minute to present the petition. I'm guessing you're there. There we go. I'll give you a 10-second warning as well.
With just 5 days' notice before the submission deadline, we've amassed a petition with over 2,200 signatures demanding Marvin Rees withdraw support for the new harbour fees until a consultation and impact assessment have been undertaken by engaging with all impacted stakeholders. The Mayor yesterday published on his website a piece attempting to pin the decades-long failure of the Harbour Authority squarely on the shoulders of boat dwellers, painting them as abusers of a system. He's also misrepresented a clause in leisure use licences to BBC Radio Bristol and on his blog, This all demonstrates how ill-informed his office is. He's been swept up in a yarn as a result of his own neglect to uphold the democratic process and is now demonising a community of good working people.
Just 10 seconds, OK?
He clearly doesn't know about the 4 years of groundwork the Boaters Association has done to try and secure the very thing he has accused boat dwellers of deliberately avoiding, securing liveaboard licences. We even conducted a needs assessment of harbour users last year. We have the data. Let us show it to you.
OK. Thanks very much.
So that's Bristol City Council chamber, a little bit more subdued than the House of Commons this week, but I'm joined in the studio by Mandy Sharman, who's the Bristol Boaters Community Association's chair. Hi, Mandy.
Hello.
First of all, how many people are in boats in the harbour?
Roughly over 100.
Right.
Yeah, over 100, and that's just people that came forward to do our survey.
And amazing, what we were just hearing there. In 5 days, 2,200. Now, hang on. If there's only a small number of people in boats, to get 2,200 on your petition is pretty good. Mm-hmm. In 5 days, why only 5 days to respond? So it sounds like you may have been bounced into something. They're trying to bounce you into something here.
It was all a very big surprise. I mean, this harbour operation review has been spoken about for years. I'm not sure how long it's been undertaken for. But we got together as a community of people because we heard that this review was happening and it was about to finish in 2019. Fair enough, we had COVID in the middle, but we sort of got together as an association so we could have a seat on the table. And we've had just so many tries at getting some sort of engagement or communication going on with the Harbour Office, multiple emails to the Mayor's Office. We are here and we want to be consulted and we want to be part of these changes.
Well, OK, so the Harbour Office, it sounds to me as if they're saying that the harbour is going to have to start turning a profit. And now, is that reasonable?
Yeah, perfectly reasonable. Everyone wants to see a successful harbour and there to be improvements in facilities.
But surely the council, the idea of us paying our council tax, the council is supposed to then manage the harbour, and it doesn't, it just seems to me that so much of this business thinking about everything's got to turn a profit, it shouldn't necessarily be doing that to the harbour. We pay our council tax that the harbour is invested in and that we have these sorts of facilities. So anyway, he's also saying there that there's not enough money for children's homes, all this sort of thing, and so you guys just need to cough up.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it completely feels like that. And that 20 years of no increase in fee, other than the sort of basic interest rate level, why has that happened? Why has there not been incremental increases over the years? All of a sudden, we've got a surprise announcement that in April a 20-year increase is going to come onto the boaters' heads all in one hit with 2 months' notice.
So you have been having increases, but they've been in line with inflation.
Yeah.
Well, in which case, why does there have to be another increase now? I mean, surely it sounds to me as if actually he's misrepresenting the situation there. He's trying to make out that, we've had 20 years with no increases in rent. Well, the rent has been increased. It's not rent, sorry, it's mooring fees, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, it's such short notice. There's been absolutely zero consultation. There's a lot of people in here with just a lot of passion and a lot of drive, and they love Bristol, they love the harbour, they love the water, they want to bring everyone down here, but it's like all being held back, that the harbour being a successful entity in its own right and being financially sustainable. So many people with so many ideas on how they want to progress the place, but they're not talking to anybody, and the only thing we've seen is the fee increase. That's it. There's no further information.
I mean, there must be some kind of body where people like you can sit and talk to the council. I mean, I can't believe that the City Council can be in a situation where they've got hundreds of people living in the harbour that they're not talking to constantly. I mean, there's surely issues coming up all the time. Issues to do with safety, pollution, all sorts of stuff's going to be happening. Maybe kids playing in places that they're not supposed to be playing, and people who are living in their boats can keep an eye on it in conjunction with the council. Surely there must be some body that you and the council have been talking to each other over the last 20 years.
Yeah, well, since personally, I was just a little person on a little boat. I've been doing that for 12 years. And when we got wind of this engagement opportunity and this big consultation process that was going to happen, we thought we'd get together. Once we've all got together to form BBCA, we've got this official dialogue going on with the Harbour Authority, and we've spoke to lots of different other sort of representative groups as well. So it's really opened the door for us, mobilising as a community. But it's still just a really difficult process to navigate, and the sort of user group meetings that they held haven't been put back on since COVID. There was one a couple of weeks ago where we were...
So is this groups... Sorry, just to get it clear, is this with the council or with the harbour?
With the Harbour Authority,
right.
That was, Bristol Harbour Recreation Users Group. I got an invite to that early in January, and we were ensured the consultation process will be beginning in April. And then, surprise, surprise, in the meantime, a member of ours accidentally stumbled across this cabinet meeting where this new fee increase and proposal of the new licensing model was going to be approved. Surprise. And we had 5 days to prepare for that.
This is really bad practice, isn't it? So what they're trying to do is sneak it through, really,
Yes.
without letting people know. So obviously we've got a big round of applause there for one of the speakers, one of the boaters speaking at the City Council chamber. How's this been going down amongst people living in boats here?
Everyone is just completely shocked at just the way that the fee itself and the cost increase itself isn't the most shocking factor, to be quite honest. It's going to be a big hard hit for lots and lots of people. But it's the way they've gone about this. This review has been dragging on for so many years with this promise of this really thorough consultation. And there's another forum that I attend called the Harbour Forum, and it's sort of more for the businesses, and the Tourist Information Board and the Harbour Authority and Bristol City Council feed into that. And everyone in there is just waiting for some information from the council. And it's in the pipeline. It's coming, apparently, in February, so I look forward to that. But it's almost a little bit too late and I think the Mayor said engagement to notify the users of the changes. And to me and many other people, engagement isn't just notifying somebody of a change.
I'm very sorry, but the council do have to do proper consultations for any changes by law. Anyway, let's have a listen now to a chap called Ben Ewing. He was one of the people who was granted deigned permission to speak by Marvin the Marvellous Mayor at the Cabinet meeting on Tuesday, and this is what he had to say.
So I'm here today for my family, my young family, and I'm asking for your help and your protection. We are boat owners, members of Cabot Cruising Club, members of Bristol Boating Community Association, and owners of a small local family business. My wife and I are self-employed electricians, and we have worked in, on and around Bristol Harbour for years, including events, infrastructure, for ferry boat companies and for boat owners. I have a roof over my head and I provide for my family. I've been living on my boat for 14 years. I found out today from a website that the Mayor has put up that I am abusing the system and damaging the city's ability to manage the harbour for all, not for the privileged few. Yesterday, I was planning for my family's future. Today, I am vulnerable.
Okay, thank you.
So that's Ben Ewing there speaking on Tuesday. He's saying I'm asking for help because he's now feeling vulnerable. So he's a family that could be bankrupted, evicted, etc. So surely he's not the only one in that situation.
No, and well done, Ben. I mean, that was talking from the heart there, wasn't it? I mean, there's many families on boats in the harbour. It's a real diverse community, and it's a very precarious sort of place to be in.
Well, it is. It was until 5 days before Tuesday. Well, this time last week, it seems to me that you suddenly this has descended on you like a bombshell. Suddenly you've got to find a load of money from nowhere. Obviously, most people don't have that money. They may have to sell their boats to raise that money if it starts to accrue as a debt. This is an attack on living in the harbour.
Yeah, completely. And I mean, a boat is cheaper than a house, completely. The mooring fees are reasonable. I cannot deny that.
Can you just give us an idea of how much someone like you would be paying for a year to live in a boat in the city? Because I know for my own friends from years gone by, for many of them that thought, look, actually getting a mortgage is far too expensive. I'm going to just get to live on a boat. In fact, I'm also friendly with some of the people that do magazines for example, the Kent and Avon Canal boating community. There's a lot of people living like this that are doing that because they don't have the money to get a mortgage.
Yes, exactly. It's I think it's a really valuable stock of affordable housing to be right in the city. Yeah, that's a fantastic place to be. It's for some people it's a choice and it's what they want to do, and it's sort of quite dreamy and picturesque to live on a boat. But for other people it isn't a choice and it's an only option. And if they haven't got that option, then what are they going to do? Where are they going to go? And that's going to see a mass exodus of people on boats in the harbour, not just people living on the water, but also the businesses as well. They're going to be.
It's funny, isn't it? Because we've had lots of luxury housing. In fact, Tony Blair bought one of these luxury flats, whatever it was, 20 years ago, for his kids. Loads and loads of luxury housing building up. Maybe it's that the people who are living in this luxury housing don't like looking down on a ragtag of boat people living down there.
Yeah, there is that opinion out there, but I think if you want to live in a property by the water, you kind of have to look at the water and the boats in it, don't you?
Well, yes, we just don't. Well, yeah. I mean, I think what I'm trying to say, I suppose, is that it seems it's fine for people to live in very expensive property on the harbour, but not if it's cheaper. So, an affordable housing. You're mentioning affordable housing there. A lot of it is just simply not affordable. I mean, it's called affordable housing. But we've now got the situation where the government's taken away things like the Help to Buy scheme for first-time buyers if they want to buy one of these affordable houses, and the companies are just failing. They're building the places, and at the moment, the housing market seems to have tanked. The value of these places is going down, and they're finding it difficult to sell them. So what do you think is going to happen? I mean, where are we at now with this? Because this has landed on your doorstep, on your poop deck, if you want, as a sort of bombshell. Whereabouts is the community going to go with this?
There's just so much upset around there. I mean, there'll be a fraction of people that just simply cannot afford it, and then they'll be selling their boats and sort of dropping off from underneath.
There must be people right now thinking, right, I'm just going to have to sell. I'm going to have to get out of town or go somewhere else.
But all we've got to think about at the moment, because the only thing we know is about this fee. That's the only information we've got. A big flaw about this whole thing is that there's complete lack of evidence, and Marvin quoted about the benchmarking study. Where is that? We want to see that. What have we been benchmarked against? Because I can guarantee they might be going for a like-for-like with the costs, but the facilities that they offer and the services that we use, they are going to be anywhere near the standard.
I'm sure if Marvin was sitting in here, which he would never do because he doesn't even reply to emails inviting him to come and talk to us, he'd say, well, actually, what you're going to get for this is Rolls-Royce facilities in the city, in the harbour.
Well, why don't they say that? If that's the intention, if we're going to pay X amount in for X amount more years, what's the priority list of what improvements we're going to see? There's no dialogue whatsoever. I think people will be able to take it on board a lot more with the increased fee if... Yes, there needs to be a lot more warning and maybe some sort of staggered approach. But if there was some sort of indication of what they're going to do, or are they going to take our money and mismanage the harbour for another 20 years?
It sounds like, Martin, I'll bring you in on this. I mean, the housing market is in a bit of a mess anyway, isn't it? We know that for many, many people, particularly first-time buyers, it's just impossible to afford a mortgage and impossible to afford to buy a house. Is the idea that everyone just has to rent now? And rent with the rent fees are astronomical, aren't they? The private rented sector is in a terrible mess.
Well, I mean, as you know, there was a Radio 4 documentary, was it last week or the week before, about the housing crisis in Bristol, which we had
last week.
It was last week, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was. I think it was Evan Davis and the PM programme actually came to Bristol to look at the problem with. It was mainly to do with building massive office blocks everywhere. It seems to me that actually the thrust of that programme was, what is the council actually doing? Because the property speculators, seem to be totally in charge of the policy.
Well, and of course they had that meeting where they discussed the possibility of rent controls, which of course the council doesn't have the power to enforce. And the gentleman who spoke at the beginning of the debate in the council chamber was saying, well, I've got a young family here. Mm-hmm. Now, if they have to sell their boat, they're going to go onto the council waiting list, aren't they? Mm-hmm. So how does that solve the problem?
Well, they're going to join the 18,000.
Yeah, they join the 18,000 on that list. And you'd have thought that if they were going to do something like this, they would try and assess, well, who in these boats is actually vulnerable and needs, because if we just evict them, they're just going to end up coming down the other side of the council house saying, well, you're going to have to house us because I've got 3 kids here or whatever it is. And obviously the thing that really screams at you is that they haven't bothered to discuss this with anybody. They've just decided to do it.
I mean, it's almost like the boaters are having to deal with a faceless corporation rather than a human being that we've elected to be the mayor.
I imagine if the idea is to make this a commercial exercise, then people with wealthy people with very posh boats will be welcome, and poor people with rather shabby little boats will not.
Well, look, you're a member of the Labour Party. We've got a Labour mayor. Why is this going on in Bristol?
Well, I don't know, because this is the first I've heard of it. Just like yourselves, I mean, why would I know? It strikes me that this is probably the officers who are driving this, because they have their own little agenda of what they want to see in lots of things.
What about the property speculators that look at the boaters and they think, well, they're getting something for nothing down there?
Oh, yes, exactly. So, in other words, what are we talking about when the decisions about housing? Really, the council is trying to do its best, but the reality is the property bubbles in this country are built into the way we run things, so that if you get on the housing ladder, you can make a fortune, and of course if you're a big property owner, you make a really big fortune. Other people can't get anywhere decent to live at any price. And if you think about it, people like his electrician, I mean, you need people like that. But if they can't find anybody, you need teachers.
No, you don't. Not at Bristol City Council.
Where can they live?
Not at Bristol City Council. People like that don't get jobs at Bristol City Council. They'll be employing, conglomerates from somewhere else, a chain of electricians from around the world who are contacts with their, international mates. There are bigger companies, a big chain. That's the way that the council seems to work. And just a minute, because the mayor has been calling these boat dwellers privileged and abusing the system.
Well, I mean, that just sounds like having a tin ear, doesn't it? He's not actually spoken to them. He's not made any assessment of who they actually are. And of course, the other side of this is to saying, well, these people aren't paying in enough, and you ought to find out who they are, surely, before you start making statements like that. It's a safety valve, just like people living in vans is a safety valve.
You've just echoed the cartoon on the Christmas edition of the Bristolian. Marv the robot, the tin-eared tin boy, easy to wind up, apparently. But anyway, back to you, Mandy, because we've talked quite enough about this. What do you think's going on, and how to fix it, do you think?
Well, they've admitted that it's been sort of mismanaged over the decades, and this issue, the cost of living crisis, the housing crisis, is all piling on top of the fact of why living on a boat is more desirable. It's more achievable for so many more people. It's the same with the van dwellers and all the different fractions of people that are classed as no fixed abode. It's just an increasing thing, and it's the system that doesn't allow these people to survive or flourish in the way that the council can deal with. I just don't think they know what to do. But as a first case, just come and speak to people. And that's where we come back to the evidence, complete lack of evidence. The Equalities impact statement says that there is no impact on its service users. How on earth is that ever true?
I know, it's difficult to know where to start. I mean, this is, I think, in a way, why they do spring these things on people, is because you think to yourself, good God, where do we start with this? It's such an enormous, it's basically a threat of eviction. I mean, I would have thought that some of the boats, at least, have got engines and they could chug along to out of Bristol and moor up somewhere else. Is that what people are thinking about doing?
Yeah, it certainly is, but moorings are hard to come by. There's waiting lists. The river is chock-a-block with boats. It's a really a problem which is just multiplying day by day. We knew this review was coming. We were waiting for the engagement process. One of the things that we really thought would happen, because it's a council statutory duty, is an accommodation needs assessment.
Well, I mean, it sounds to me like you might have to take them to court and say, well, look, you can't do this without this assessment.
People are mentioning things like that in the community, but to me it seems... I just don't see why it should even get to that point. We're sort of here making a plea to please speak to the community, understand what these proposals actually mean for real people, families and businesses?
I mean, surely this is kind of, Martin, this is kind of ruled by accountants, isn't it? The accountants at City Hall have said, well, we need to rake more money in. The government's giving us less. We've got loads of special educational needs kids that we took the money away from, and we've now been told by the High Court we've got to give them more money. We need to find out, some sort of cost centre somewhere. The boaters are just another cost centre they need to rake some money in from.
Well, it's interesting you mention that, because I imagine even if they put the fees up, the mooring fees, it's not going to be a big money spinner, is it?
No.
We're talking peanuts here. You know, I mean, how are they going to invest in the harbour by increasing the mooring fees? I mean, it's just you might get a bit of extra money. But if you drive out the small boaters, are you going to get an influx of wealthier boaters who are going to pay more? But even if you did, it's still small beer. To build a piece of infrastructure around the harbour costs millions. This isn't going to cover that, is it?
Well, there's been quite a bit of press around. Good old Alex Seabrook, who's one of the local democracy reporters here in Bristol, bless him, has done an article for the Bristol Post, warnings over Bristol harbour fee hikes, which could make boat dwellers homeless. An upcoming huge hike in fees to use Bristol Harbour could make boat dwellers homeless, a community group has warned. A ferry operator has also said many small businesses on the docks face going bust if the proposed fee increases are introduced in April. But apparently the Mayor doesn't care about local businesses going bust because they're not big businesses who are his chums, even though he's supposed to be a Labour Mayor. And also, today, Alex has penned an article... Actually, no, sorry, this is Wednesday. The Mayor says sorry over Bristol Harbour fee hike after warnings boat dwellers could be made homeless again. He was heckled in a public meeting, that is on Tuesday evening, after claiming some boat dwellers were privileged and abusing the system. People living and working in Bristol Harbour face huge fee increases from April. Well, what about this particular point, Mandy? Because the actual fee increases, what have they actually decided on Tuesday? Did they decide to go ahead with all this?
It got approved, yeah, and I think it's going to go to a full cabinet meeting within the next couple of weeks to get officially approved. But I think if Marvin wants it through, then he's got the power to put it through, hasn't he?
So he just decided on his own. So the only person you can really appeal to is Marvin himself. And in fact, we heard from one of the boaters who was doing that, he's saying, look, help, because we could be about to lose our homes if you get your way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, during the cabinet meeting, Marvin did very kindly offer to continue the engagement process with us, because obviously there was a lot of people there was a lot of questions, a lot of statements, petition, there was a lot of support. So Marvin very kindly offered to continue this engagement process, and that's when he got heckled, because it hasn't even begun. There was an introductory meeting with an external consultancy firm 2 years ago, where I had a half-an-hour chat with someone just to introduce who I was, who my organisation was and what we represented. That was an introductory meeting. The stakeholder engagement was to follow.
So the council are saying things like they want an extra £100 for supplying electric to boaters, and an extra £325 for the annual residential mooring.
What is that? That's my question. What is that new licence category, which is what a lot of people would like and would need in the harbour? What does that mean? Who is that for? Where's it going to be? Why, if the housing crisis, it's everything that Bristol City Council does is, if they can relieve the housing crisis, they're going to mention it. It's in the blog, it's in the papers. If they can do anything to take this pressure off the housing market, and here we are with a new residential licence category, and there's no mention of actually increasing the housing capacity in the harbour on boats.
Nothing at all,
no.
In fact. And these fees, by the way, are not just... that doesn't sound too much, does it? £325 for annual residential mooring, but it's per metre.
Per metre, per year.
Yeah.
My vessel is 20 metres long.
Okay, so that's
nearly £7,000. That's if I'm lucky enough to even get one of those. So that's an inflation. Personally, I'm on a wall mooring at 130.
You know what I'd do is I'd get one of those, is it Dutch barges that are really fat but quite short? That sounds like the way to get around this. I mean, it all sounds very arbitrary and actually quite cruel, Martin.
Yeah, Marvin's case saying that the central government have cut off our money to the bone and all the rest of it, there's a strong case for that. I mean, that's why councils all over the country are struggling to resolve various issues, because they just don't have the resources. And that's to do with austerity, Osborne and all the rest of it. But what you can't... they haven't thought this through in terms of this is a safety valve for people who can't afford other kinds of housing. Mm-hmm. Same as, the Conservative government criminalised squatting, which again was another safety valve for people who couldn't afford housing. And the same with moving van dwellers on. Mm-hmm. I mean, there's more and more people in the United States, that home of freedom and democracy and the capitalism, lots of people live in their cars and in tent cities, because that is the way it's going. And it's almost like trying to stop the tide coming in to say that we're going to just get rid of all of this and gentrify it all, when in actual fact everything's moving in the opposite direction. I mean, even professional people can't afford to rent. So what are they going to do? I imagine there will be people down there who are professionals, working in professional jobs, and they can't afford to rent anywhere, so having a boat's the only way to do it.
OK, Mandy, maybe you could just explain roughly how much someone like you has to pay a year in mooring fees and what these changes will mean.
So at the moment, there's a range of fees all right across the harbour, and with this new fee structure, they're trying to simplify that, which is fair enough, because it is quite complicated. But you've got to understand the facilities that people can access are completely varied as well. Some people have got laundry rooms, toilet and shower facilities, proper waste disposal, a pontoon, security gate, keypad, parking, all this stuff. Some people have just got a wall, no water, no electric, and they're standardising all these fees. For me, on my mooring, it only goes up £20 per metre per year. That's fine. Nobody I've spoke to is against paying more to contribute to making it a better place, because that's all everybody wants is improvements in facilities, because it is dire. But when you see some of the huge, it's like hundreds of % increase.
Well, somebody in the meeting on Tuesday was saying 300%, three times more they'll have to pay.
Yeah.
Now that you could be looking at, how much?
It gets. So, say a boat of my size on a residential mooring will cost about £7,000. At the moment, it's about 2.5.
Right. So
that's 177% increase. That if I'm lucky enough to get offered one of those, or if I can afford one of those.
Well, look, Green Councillor Annie Stafford Townsend, representing the Central Ward, says there'd been no consultation, no engagement, no equalities impact assessment, and what it means for those whose lives depend on the harbour. Well, I mean, it sounds to me like this is just an absolutely appalling thing to do to your own citizens, particularly from a Labour mayor that doesn't seem to care. I mean, we've just had this changes in the clean air zone, which means that people who can afford to buy brand new diesels for 60 grand don't pay a penny. And now he's doing this to the boaters. You have to really kind of wonder what party he represents, if any. But anyway, look, what about, thoughts of resisting this somehow? Because it may be that this is just going to get it imposed and boaters are going to be picked off one by one.
Yeah, well, that's why we've gotten together. I mean, we've got a really good sort of communication amongst the group. I've spoke to so many of the other stakeholders over the last few days, and everyone shares the main sort of couple of concerns, and then everyone's got their own sort of tangent on what it means for them individually. But we are all getting together, we're having meetings, we're mobilising, we're speaking to as many different people that we can that can help us, and no one is resistant to paying any more, but people would like a reasonable increase, enough warning so they can plan ahead. 2 months just isn't enough, and they want to be consulted. The people on the water have got some really, really good ideas at how the harbour can make more money. We've got tons of them. And how it can be a better place and more inclusive. But they're not even giving us the window to listen to. I mean,
it sounds to me they've got somewhere between maybe 200, 300 to £1 million they're getting in from you guys. What have they been doing with that money that they've been getting in mooring fees over the last few years?
So a primary job of the Harbour Office, the Harbour Authority, is flood defence in the city. Yeah, that benefits a whole load of people. If it wasn't for the Harbour
Office... Yeah, not just you. You don't need to worry about that. If we get a flood, your boats just float upwards, don't they?
Yeah, but then I'd sink in the mud at low tide as well. So I'm very happy that they do a really good job of keeping the water levels where they should be. You know, that's a massive part of the Harbour Authority. You said about the fancy flats on the harbour side. That land would have been used as part of the docks estate for the warehouses, for the commercial shipping and all the goods that used to come on and off those vessels when it was a commercially trading harbour, and they would have paid taxes on the land. So I'm not sure about whether the boats on the harbour is what's always funded the harbour. I think it's the activity on the land which has contributed to keeping the harbour operational.
Well, it's also, sorry to interrupt you, but it's also what is really good for the value of these properties is that if the harbour is in a decent state, if it's all overgrown and messy and hasn't been cleaned out and that kind of thing, then the value of these luxury flats all around it starts to go down and down and down. So actually, by you paying to keep up for the upkeep of the harbour, you're actually helping out all these people in their £1 million luxury flats all around you.
Yeah, and I wouldn't just want to lump it onto the person in a £1 million flat, but it's Bristol City Harbour is an asset for everyone. It's the biggest tourist thing we've got in the whole city. It's the most wonderful free day out if you can afford the ice cream in the expensive ice cream vans around the docks. It's a wonderful place that millions of people enjoy, and all we're seeing is a massive lump sum onto boat owners. That's the only thing we've got about how this place is going to improve, and it's just it's absolutely unbelievable.
Well, it isn't. I can tell you, it's not unbelievable. You see some of the things that this mayor has gotten up to. In fact, some of the things, previous mayors, like I remember sitting here talking about George Ferguson and his basically saying we're not going to fund the St Paul's Carnival unless all you lot get off the committee, all you West Indians from St Paul's get off the committee, and I'm going to decide who's going to be on the committee. I remember that, being quite shocked that the council, take that sort of attitude. You've also got a by-election, I think, haven't you? Hot Wells and Harbourside by-election. I don't know if you guys get you get to vote there. Do you know?
Well, that is the problem of. So there's all these different boat users in the harbour. We've got people on leisure vessels and people that come and visit. They need good facilities on the land, okay, because they're on smaller boats and they use those sort of things. We've got residential licence holders, big boats, proper houseboats. They've got an address, and then we've got all these other people spending a lot of time on their other boats. They're all fully equipped as a residence, yeah? That doesn't give you a post box, doesn't give you an address. A right to vote? No
really?
Chance.
This is awful, Martin. We've got hundreds of people in the city that don't have a right to vote.
If you're a relatively permanent basis, you ought to get a right to vote, surely.
There is a right to vote. How do you access that?
Yeah, well, I suppose...
This is a tip of the iceberg.
Yeah.
It's getting kids into schools, it's accessing your doctor, it's getting the social care, there's so many things which are hurdles for these privileged few that live on boats. No.
One of the things that strikes me actually as you were talking is that the whole council tax, which is another version of community charge poll tax, when we had the rating system, which was abolished by Margaret Thatcher, those wealthy people who live in the £1 million houses will be paying a hell of a lot more than they are now. And that was how things used to be funded. But we got rid of that, and it's all dumped onto the little people.
Well, that's right. The owners of the property used to pay the tax.
That's right. So there's no way to evade it. It was much easier to collect for the city council, because if you don't pay it, we just impound the building. Whereas now, what they actually spend a lot of time doing, I used to work at the Bristol Debt Advice Centre, is chasing up people who owe council tax. And, of course, the amount of money they owe is trivial, and the amount of effort to try and squeeze it out of them is enormous. And, of course, it's a stupid way to fund things. They've still got the rating system in Northern Ireland, because it wasn't abolished. They didn't dare to do it. They did it first in Scotland. If you remember, when they brought in the poll tax in Scotland, they did it deliberately there, because they knew there would be a lot of hostility to it, and they thought they could ride that out. But they didn't dare to introduce it in Northern Ireland, because it was still the troubles were still going, and they realised that we can't send bailiffs down the Shankill Road or the Falls Road to collect people's televisions, because they're all going to end up dead. So they didn't do it, and that means that local government in Northern Ireland is still funded through the rates. And of course, we shouldn't have abolished the rates.
No.
There's lots of things we shouldn't have done, and then we think 20, 30 years later, you think, oh God,
but
how
then
did we end up
Tony
in this
Blair
place?
and Gordon Brown didn't reverse any of this, did
Well,
they?
no, they
could
didn't.
have done, no.
They didn't even bother to revaluate, because all the houses are still valued at what they were in the 1990s,
Anyway,
and they've
look,
not been valued up.
As an attempt to sort of sum up, Mandy, I'll leave the final word to you. You can, talk for as long as you want about this, but I'd also like you, if you can, and if you want to look at the sort of bigger picture, because we seem to be piling these extra fees, taxes, whatever, to pay for local authorities, for central government too, in some ways, particularly local authorities, onto the people who can least afford to pay it. The tax burden seems to have shifted over to people with not much money. And actually, I remember I was chatting to him this week, Kevin Carhill, former Sunday Times journalist, on this programme. He used to be quite regularly. We'll have to get him on again soon. He came up with a terrific headline for the Sunday Times back in the 1980s. His article, which was a front-page lead, "The Rich Pay No Tax." Now, we seem to be creeping towards that with this. But anyway, I'll just leave that, how do we fix the situation? Because it just seems to me that slowly but surely, more and more of the attempts to sort of, with Martin was just talking about council tax too, is falling on people who can least afford to pay it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Where do I start?
It's a big look, I know it's a massive question, but I mean, talk about if you could just talk about your own situation, and if, say, for example, it may be easier to think like this: if you were in Marvin's situation, what would you be doing?
I would be meeting with these stakeholder groups and giving them the engagement and the consultation that they need over a reasonable period, and really get a grip on these different groups, what their constraints are, what the opportunities are, how can we help. Do you know what I mean? The businesses that operate in the harbour are family businesses, long-standing, hard-working family businesses.
But they're not very good at lobbying, are they?
No.
The big business is really good at lobbying, getting the ear of the powerful people.
They're surviving. They're just about surviving. And the impacts of these fees and charges at such a sudden and sort of drastic implementation are just going to wipe out a huge fraction of boat-based businesses in the harbour and the boat dwellers. And it's going to change the complete demographic, and what you see as a visitor coming down to Bristol City Docks. I believe if this comes into play in a couple of months' time, it is going to look very much different to what you see now.
It's going to be like almost like a kind of Highland clearances in the harbour if we're not careful.
It'll be out with the old and in with the new, and it will be the newer boats that can afford those higher fees. It will be the boats with the helicopters on the top. And we don't want to be like Portishead, as lovely as Portishead Marina is. Bristol isn't loved for that. It's loved for the diversity of vessels and these long-standing businesses and the faces that you see on the docks.
Well, I wonder if some of these decisions, Martin, are being made by people who have got maybe 2 or 3 boats in 2 or 3 harbours around the country that they maybe visit once a year.
You can see where it might end up. Where Bristol Harbour, it just becomes just for wealthy people, really, and other people just visiting occasionally and watch the wealthy people in their posh boats.
It's a very basic form, it seems to me, Mandy, of social cleansing. Mm-hmm. Actually, that seems to be what's happening. Mm-hmm. Horrible for it to be going on anyway. How do people follow your story and keep in touch with what's going on here?
You can have a look on our website, which is bristolboaters.org. We are in the process of setting up a news page, and we've got a mailing list for anyone that's got a mooring in Bristol. We've been busy doing lots of sort of face-to-face meetings. We're going to prepare for the next cabinet. We're really trying to sort of mobilise, and we just want a delay on this decision, so people have got time to talk, discuss, breathe. I'd really love Marvin's office and the Harbour office, Bristol City Council. We need to get in the room and discuss about the impacts on these people.
Well, I'm sorry, but my experience is he doesn't do things like that.
Well, can I just say that you have got an opportunity with this by-election, because it's actually very tight between the Liberal Democrats, the Greens and the Labour Party.
No, maybe. Well, Lib Dems and Greens.
Yes, no, but the Labour Party have still got 600 votes at stake here. That's what they got last time. And it is coming up, and people, they wanted to sell the library off to the cathedral school. But the Labour Party activists knocking on the doors in Hot Wales have found there's massive opposition to this, because people use that library. And because they want to win the by-election, they're prepared to reconsider the decision. I mean, this is how it's supposed to work. Now, when you say you haven't got the votes there because you're not all on boats, OK, but never mind, the community around you have got votes. And it's an opportunity, that's the only thing that politicians actually listen to.
Let's hope that they can get that community mobilised and do something about this. It's quite obvious. It seems like a David and Goliath.
I can imagine the Greens would pick this up.
Yeah, they've come to a few of our meetings already, including Patrick McAllister came along with Annie Stafford-Townsend. They've been to a few of our meetings and they are really, really supportive.
Well, it seems like a no-brainer to me for anyone that wants to push the Labour Party and Marvin Rees out of the city. Anyway, Mandy Sharman from the Bristol, what is it?
Bristol Boaters Community Association.
Do you want to just give your website again, finally?
It's bristolboaters.org.
Thank you ever so much for coming in and sharing all that with us. Fascinating conversation, and more power to your elbow, or to your oars, or whatever it is you use to get around. Actually, seriously though, have people got engines? Could they just move out of the city if they needed to, most people?
Yeah, of course they can. But the sort of gridlock up the river and the waiting lists in the marinas it's a pressurised sort of system to be in. My vessel's been there for 20 years on an annual licence. My vessel's quite happy being in the city. I've set up routes in the city alongside many, many other people.
Well, it's a great place to be, except when people do things like this. So, anyway, Mandy, thanks ever so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Martin, we're now going to have a listen to an interesting, I thought, and it's a sort of related topic, a guy called James Perry from Ethical Millionaires, if you can believe such a thing exists. He says that the tax burden in this country is falling on all the wrong people. You can imagine that from a millionaire.
So we're a group of wealth holders who are making the point that the tax system is imbalanced because it puts too much burden on working people and work and doesn't tap this vast pool of wealth which has accrued over the last few years.
Okay, so how much money have you given yourself that you weren't originally asked to give?
Well, so tax isn't voluntary. So I would distinguish between tax and philanthropy. The point about tax is it's a systemic intervention to fund hospitals, schools, the things that the demos, the democracy decides that it wants provided for it. So philanthropy is not a solution to this. We need the tax system to look at all of the different sources of revenue and tax them fairly for everybody. Okay, well, starting at the beginning, I think the first point is that tax is a contribution to a functioning society. We all want to be in it together. We want a society that's working, and we can all see the disintegration of public services right now. And we have a taxation system which looks to income. So it looks to working people to fund those public services. And what it ignores is the fact that over the last several years, decades, new wealth, when it's created, has accrued pretty much to the wealthy. So 2/3 of new wealth created in the last 2 years has gone to the top 1%. So I think what people don't realize is that when you look at the kind of wealth distribution over the sort of from the poorest 1% to the richest 1%, when you get to the top 1%, you actually get down to the top 0.1%, and you see this new wealth creation drifts like snow into the hands of these extremely wealthy people and then isn't touched by the tax system. And because the tax system is focused on the 99% who are really squeezed and undergoing this cost of living crisis, that's why the state can't afford to provide the services it needs, because it's just not touching this extreme wealth, which is a modern phenomenon. The tax system actually incentivizes wealthy people not to pay tax. It offers a non-dom status, for example, where people can offshore their assets and not pay tax on them. So the tax system, for example, has a lower marginal taxation rate for income that comes from capital, from saving capital, than it does from work. So it already favors the wealthy in terms of its structural design. So that's the first point. And the second point is with respect to avoidance. Your assets have your name on them. They are traceable. So this idea that people can ferret away their assets under the sofa and the taxman can't find them is really not true.
But it's not necessarily about the taxman not finding them. It's about saying, well, I'm going to register my company in Switzerland, for example, where tax is lower, or I'm going to move to a different country or I'm going to base myself for tax purposes in a different country, surely.
Yeah, look, I think that there are people out there who are of that mindset, but I don't think they're in the majority. I think you'll find most people of wealth are rooted in community. Their children are being educated in British schools. They love Britain. They're here because they want to be here. And this idea that they can just up sticks and move to the Cayman Islands when the Revenue Service wants to take not an unreasonable amount of money off them. They're going to still be left with substantial wealth. No one's talking about confiscation. We're talking about, for example, our group is talking about taxing 1% of wealth over £10 million. These people are still going to be okay. But but even 1% of wealth over £10 million results in a massive tax take, because these drifts of wealth that have accrued over the last years are just so massive.